Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, April 12th. Let's get right to the news. Protests erupted last night in Minnesota after the police-involved shooting of a black man during a traffic stop. It happened in the city of Brooklyn Center, about 10 miles north of Minneapolis, where tensions are already high amid the murder trial of former officer Derek Chauvin. Family has identified the victim as 20-year-old Dante Wright. According to the Brooklyn Center Police Department, officers were attempting to make a traffic stop when just before 2 p.m., they say they noticed the driver had an outstanding warrant for his arrest. Officers tried to take him into custody, but police say he got back into his vehicle. That's when one officer fired a weapon, hitting the driver. The vehicle then traveled several blocks before striking another vehicle. The driver died at the scene of the crash. Brooklyn Center officers wear body cameras, and the police department said yesterday that it believes the body cameras and dash cameras were on during this incident. In the hours after the shooting, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department headquarters and clashed with officers in riot gear. Multiple rounds of tear gas were fired by law enforcement in an effort to disperse the crowd. Minnesota's Department of Public Health said overnight that the National Guard was being mobilized at the request of local authorities. It came amid reports of looting targeting the Brooklyn Center Walmart and a nearby shopping mall. Let's bring in the host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. We also have with us professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and former member of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, Cedric Alexander. He is a former public safety director in DeKalb County in Georgia. Good to have you all this morning.
Reverend Sharpton, you've obviously been following events on the ground very closely in Minneapolis, in touch with the family every day during the trial. Give us your reaction to what happened yesterday and last night in Minneapolis.
Well, what is very disturbing is that even as the nation watches the trial of Derek Chauvin, who is on trial for killing George Floyd by putting his knee on the neck for 9 minutes and 27 seconds, we have right in the suburbs of the same city an unarmed man killed by police. That they say they were seeking him because of a warrant. Well, the immediate reaction I'm getting on the ground, I talked to people there last night, is that even if the young man was wrong or should have been one that submitted to an arrest if a warrant was legitimate, it does not warrant his being killed, which is why there was some outrage and protest last night. We're still looking for the facts. But you must also remember, Joe, the same weekend, we see this video from Virginia of a black man in Army fatigues that was pepper sprayed because he wanted to drive where there was a lighted area to answer what the police had. He had no warrant, did nothing wrong, was a member of the armed forces in Army fatigue.
Right.
They pepper sprayed him, and when he said, I'll get out the car, I'm afraid, he said, you have reason to be. So this is why law enforcement in this country must be addressed. It's a national problem, from George Floyd to what happened yesterday in Brookline and the outskirts of Minneapolis to what happened in Virginia. We have to come to terms with how we're going to police the police in this country.
Reverend Al, since you brought that up, let's bring that into the conversation right now. U.S. Army Second Lieutenant Caron Nazario filed a lawsuit this month, claiming his rights were violated during an encounter with then Windsor, Virginia police officer Joe Gutierrez and Daniel Crocker. The lawsuit, first obtained by the Washington Post, says Nazario is asking for at least $1 million in damages and for the court to rule his constitutional rights were violated. Nazario's lawsuit claimed he was originally pulled over for not having a rear license plate, but video shows he had a temporary plate in the car window. We should note the video was provided by the attorney for Nazario. Officer Crocker wrote in his report that he believed Nazario was eluding police and called it a high-risk traffic stop. Wonder why, though? Let's take a look.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car now! What's going on? You're fixing to ride the lightning, son.
Get out the car!
You received an order. Obey it.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Get out.
Yeah, you should be. Get out. Back up.
Whoa, hold on. What's going on? Hold on. Air Force is deployed.
Get out of the car and get on the ground now. You're gonna get it again.
I don't even want to reach my seatbelt.
Take your seatbelt off and get out of the car.
Nazario heard they're saying he didn't want to reach for a seatbelt. One of the reasons why is because sometimes when somebody reaches into their car, they think they're reaching for a gun. I don't know why they put this man in this position. The Army lieutenant was eventually released without being charged. In an incident report from Gutierrez, the officer wrote they decided against charges because they didn't want the stop to affect Nazario's military rank. Are you kidding me?
It really should. It should affect the rank of the officer that behaved extraordinarily.
Nazario's lawyer says the lieutenant was threatened not to report the incident if he didn't want his career destroyed. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam responded in a statement yesterday saying, quote, "The incident in Windsor is disturbing and angered me. I am directing the Virginia State Police to conduct an independent investigation." Officials from Windsor, Virginia said the officers failed to follow use of force policies and Officer Gutierrez has been fired. NBC News has reached out to both officers involved for comment, but has not heard back. And Joe, we watched this video in its entirety. It starts back in the car with the officers before they open the door and even get out. They draw their guns right away. And we said to each other, we'd be afraid to get out if two cops were pointing loaded guns at us, screaming at the top of their lungs. This escalated because there was so much fear involved from the get-go, fear that didn't need to be there.
As a 6'4" white
They
man
pepper sprayed him
from the South, if I were in the lieutenant's position and I had a police officer this out of control, and I was showing my hands, showing my arms outside of the window, and I stated that I was afraid to get out of the car, and for good reason, because this officer was so amped up, out of control, crazy, then that if I were afraid being in that position, what about a black man who is seen time and again throughout his life that black men especially are treated differently than other Americans when it comes to being stopped in the car? And Eddie Glaude, he did everything correctly. He was fearful for good reason. So what did he do? He drove to a well-lit area where everybody could see, hoping that cameras were there. He wanted to make sure that everybody saw everything that happened. They drew their guns on a guy, on a lieutenant, for God's sakes, a lieutenant serving our country, protecting us every day. A lieutenant in uniform who put his hands outside of the car and continued to be told to show his hands, but get out of the car at the same time. Eddie, this was, well, as Mika was saying, this was just absolutely offensive.
A lieutenant who probably has mental health effects from something that happened in America rather than what happened when he was serving abroad. Can you imagine?
Well, and even asking them to take care of his dog in the back seat, who had obviously, was probably choking on the pepper spray as well. This is disgusting. The governor and the police officers, the people that lead the police officers in this area, in this state, need to figure out how the hell this happened. This is sickening, especially Eddie Glaude. If they are this insensitive during the George Floyd trial, then there really is little hope for this officer or any of these officers.
Right.
Right, Joe. So the interesting thing is that this officer may very well get, he was fired. He may very well be hired within, a month or so at another police office, police station. But look, it's very difficult for black folk in this moment to give police officers the benefit of the doubt that they're going to treat us like human beings. Right. So here we have this moment where as soon as you pull into the lighted gas station, Joe, you see that he has a temporary tag in his window. So the very reason for the stop is no longer obtains. And then you get out with your guns pointed, and you end up in this situation where this lieutenant is on the ground weeping, asking, why are you treating me like this? And I think it's important for us to connect this moment, Joe, with what we saw last night. Because the death, the murder at the end, is the consequence of a form of policing that eventuates in the death. So what we have to do is begin to look at how are black folk being policed. Joe, you never have to worry about, you tell me, Mika, you tell me, if you ever have to worry about your child being killed by a police officer because of a traffic stop, getting the call that Dante Wright's father got, do you ever worry that a police officer will kill your child because of air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror? Or that your husband, Joe, will get stopped and then put on the ground, handcuffed, threatened to be lit up with lightning, called a corporal, a specialist, and then when he says, I'm a second lieutenant, told to get on the ground, humiliated, brought to tears. Do you ever think you would experience that? So the killing, the death, is the consequence, y'all, of a form of policing that leads up to the confrontation. That's what we have to address. We always address it at the end. And we're not getting to the process, what happens between the stop and the death that is actually the precipitating events.
And because we don't have time to show the whole thing, I ask everybody at home to please, if you haven't seen it, to do it, because we just showed certain points near the end. You do get a chance to see the buildup on the body count and how this lieutenant expressed his concerns from the very beginning, that he was afraid to get out of the car. He showed his hands. He went to a well-lit area. He did everything that someone who got pulled over, who was afraid of a police officer who was jacked up and out of control, was afraid that if he got out, he was going to end up dead, just like George Floyd.
And they put him on the ground, and they kept telling him to get on the ground, which I can't even imagine how frightening that must have been. And then here is an exchange that happened after the incident began to settle down in terms of the high emotions at play. And the victim here is standing by a car, and the officers are now trying to explain what happened. This exchange makes me wonder why he's only suing for $1 million. Take a look.
I understand you want to get to a well-lit area, I get that. But when we follow you that long, look at the climate this day, and against everybody, against us, against y'all.
Against everybody.
Really?
I mean, Cedric Alexander,
climate's bad for them.
Throughout my adult life, I've always tried to give benefit of the doubt to police officers. You will, and I've said it on the show, you will never hear me on this show when police officers, whether they are black, Hispanic, white, Asian American, if they're kicking down doors, if they're in a dangerous situation and they make a split-second mistake, well, we don't know what it's like unless we're in that position. But in this case, like the George Floyd case, they knew what was going on. They had minute after minute after minute to correct their wrongs, and they just refused to do it. They continued to humiliate a lieutenant who was serving their country, when they not only had the responsibility, but you would assume had the training to draw back and calm down and understand they had made a terrible mistake. But it just went from bad to worse. And they had to humiliate the black man, get him on the ground, shove the lieutenant on the ground until he started weeping. It is disgusting. I just want to know, you've been studying this for a long time. Why do we keep seeing videos like this even a year after George Floyd's death?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. But let me say, Joe, I had a number of people call me here last night and very early this morning here in Pensacola just to discuss what they had witnessed through this video. I'm a 40-year police veteran. I'm retired. I'm back home. I spend a lot of time now talking about reform and reimagining policing and doing my part to try to do what we can do to help change this. But this video that we're looking at, it is painfully egregious. And for him to have gone through what he experienced, not just the fact that he's a soldier, which is really important, but the fact that he's a human being. But let me start by saying this about that traffic stop. They called this in as a felony stop. That was not a felony stop because you cannot see someone tag displayed. So he called it in as a felony stop. And as you noticed in your reporting, he even lied about the type of stop that it was, what had occurred. And then we see this ongoing humiliation, this ongoing just horrible treatment of an individual, a human being who happens to be a military soldier. And we see it in this time that this country is in, where we're trying to fix the things that have been wrong since the inception of policing. So this is not a new issue. It's just that we're able to catch it now on video, and we're seeing it over and over and over again. American policing in this country is broken. It's going to have to be fixed. We cannot continue to move forward the way that we're doing now and expect somehow miraculously overnight something is going to change. It's going to take a lot of legislation at the federal, state, and local levels in order to change these behaviors, because even if you look at that traffic stop, tactically, if that was a felony stop, it was totally inaccurate, wrong. Was not trained that way. But it was not a felony stop to begin with. And in addition to all that, to humiliation, calling him out the way that they did, you're going to ride the lightning? No, Officer Gutierrez, you should have been fired the night that this occurred. And he should never be in policing again. And quite frankly, those who hired him in that city, from his elected officials down to his police chief, need to be held responsible. And not just monetarily, but held responsible politically for having that type of personality and individual as part of their police ranks. It's not all about training. It's who we're hiring. And we're not hiring the right people for these jobs.
Amen. And
That's
it
right.
is. And I just got to say here over the past year, it's not just Cedric saying that and Eddie saying that and the Rev saying that. They will all confirm. They hear that. I hear that from police officers all the time who look at these videos and go, my God, what the hell is happening in the ranks there? Why isn't there better discipline? And Rev, something that I know you hear all the time, something that Mika and I were saying when we were watching this unfold on video is, my God, how many times does this happen when the body cams aren't on? How many times did this happen before we started having body cams, before we started
How could body cams have ever been a debate?
having cameras on our phones? We're only seeing this now, obviously, because of the technology of the past 10, 15 years. And it shows, you and I have been talking about body cams nonstop. Every police officer in America has to have it. They have to be turned on if an incident like this happens and they don't have it on, then the burden of proof is on them. But Rev, how many times does this happen when the body cams aren't on?
And that is a real fear that we live with every day in our communities. And let me tell you, if it was not for the 21st Century Task Force that President Obama had, there would not be as much body cameras available as there are. I believe Cedric was on that task force. We had to fight for that, and I hope this administration and this Congress will legislate. We've done the demonstration. We need the legislation. This will not stop until bad police, and most police are not bad, but bad police know they will be held accountable, until they know qualified immunity is not going to shelter them, until they know there is a penalty for this. We are faced this morning with this tape with a 20-year-old young man unarmed that is dead, whose family's going to be reaching out to someone. That's where people like me and National Action Network step in. How do we explain this over and over again without changing the laws? The good news is you are right. Many police are now beginning to speak up. For the first time, we saw police officers take the stand in Minneapolis and testify against Chauvin, which I've not seen in the years that I've been out here fighting against police misconduct. I've never seen the blue wall pierced as it has in Minneapolis. But even as that happened, a policeman still can take his gun and shoot and kill right in the same county that this trial is going on. We need to deal with, if there is no legislation, there will not be a change in behavior in bad cops. Bad cops are not going to be converted. They have to therefore be convicted in the court of law if they do what is wrong.
And as you said, be called out by good cops. The vast majority of law enforcement officers, be they Hispanic or black or white, who put their lives on the line every day to protect us. Just as it's happening in Minneapolis, it has to happen across the country. Good cops have to call out these punks. And one final thing, I just want to say, Lieutenant Nazario, we are so grateful for your service to this country, and I know a grateful nation is embarrassed, is humiliated by what you were put through. And we're praying for you, and we're thanking you again for the decisions you've made throughout your life to serve this country in uniform. Thank you so much.
Reverend Al Sharpton and Cedric Alexander, thank you both very much for being on this morning, very early this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe.